Good morning. I'm going to be talking to you about the definition of what chronic homelessness is and the definition of what a disability is. Now, the chronic homelessness and disability into this is going to be the definitions from the federal government, and that would be HUD. Okay. Now, these two definitions together are what are going to help you be able to get HUD housing. Of course, you can get it a lot of different ways, but these are the two critical factors that you will need together in order to be at the very top of any waiting list for housing anywhere in the country. It is the federal definition, and I've got a lot of documentation that we should go over. The other thing is, if you haven't watched how to get low-income housing or how to qualify for low-income housing, so those are two different videos I've done. I would start with those first and then work your way back to this because this is where it all leads to. Now, with that being said, I'm going to stop here and then we're going to be recording from a screen while I explain and show you the actual documentation from HUD itself. And this also applies to all COC programs, which are basically for the homeless, which is basically the back door to HUD. They run two different programs, one where you go to their building and the other being programs that use HUD's grants and funds through their own buildings. And so with that being covered, let's start with the next. Okay, welcome back. And so now we're looking at HUD's definition of chronically homeless. We're going to skip this one and go down one step. And here are the documentation standards, and it says for chronic homeless, but it also includes documentation for disability. To make things simple, I'm going to give you the short answer what all this means. You're welcome to read it on your own time. The links will be below if you want to look at the documents yourself. Chronically homeless is really, there's two versions of that. You need to be not on somebody's lease, or they can prove that you've been in somebody's home on their lease, okay? Other than that, you can pretty much apply for chronically homeless. Going to a shelter, checking in for one night, staying the night, offers you an opportunity to get a homeless letter, and it also gives you a bed ticket, and then they have to enter you into the HMIS, which is a database for homeless people, regardless of what city that you live in. Shelters are entering you into that database, so you physically have a record of that. Besides 12 consecutive months, there's one other acceptable answer for them, and that is when, say that you're staying at Sally's house, okay? And here's the deal. If the head of household is currently staying in an well, I should say institution. So if you're in jail for less than 90 days, that qualifies as part of it. But to get to the bigger point, over a 3-year period, you would have been homeless, had to have been homeless at least 4 times, okay, 4 or more times. And each time that you were able to get into stable housing, that couldn't have lasted more than 7 days, okay? 7 days is your line. Don't go past that. And what I mean by that is, yeah, I checked in the Holiday Inn. I was there 7 days. And then I was homeless, let's say 90 days. And then I checked back in for 6 days. And then I didn't have the money, and I was back on the street 4 months. And now you're up to 7 months. You repeat that process until you have 12 months worth. So you either have to have a consecutive all 12 months or an accumulation of a total of 12 months over 3 years, but you cannot have been stably housed more than 7 days at any given time during that 3-year period, okay? That is the exactly how that's supposed to work out. Let's talk about the documentation for that. First is your homeless letter, 2 being in the system, and 3, if you can get a community member, which is just about anybody, saying, yeah, I'll see the guy at the red light all the time. I've seen him out there for years. That is sufficient evidence under HUD or any housing program to prove it. The other way would be, obviously the intake worker looking at you and making that observation, and I've told the people in the past that people can be very biased. Don't depend on that. Always go with documentation, okay? So as you see, the situation on the left side says situation homelessness 12 consecutive months, and you see right below that in blue, housing is chronically homeless 4+ occasions totaling 12 months over 3 years, and this may also include institutional stays of 90 for less than 90 days. Okay, so you've been in the crazy farm, for less than 90 days, or jail for less than 90 days. Okay, and that's really all that comes down to as far as proof. Now, documentation of disability is a little bit different, but I first want to tell you there's a much lower standard of proving a disability to HUD than there is going out and getting a disability check. That is two different deals, okay? We're talking about a disability exclusively proving that for HUD to get housing. This is not to get a disability check, okay? Because the requirements to get those checks are extremely high, whereas HUD is very, very low. Okay, let's explain this. A written verification of disability from a licensed professional. It doesn't even need to be a doctor. Anybody that is a counselor or a caseworker that went to college and it has a license of any type, a licensed professional care worker, a licensed professional nurse, you know, all of these people can simply write the verification, and I will show you the disability form itself, okay? So you do not have to go and actually see a doctor. I would recommend that you have this discussion with a doctor, because that seems more likely than the others. I'm not saying the others are just fine, but I would really try to address this with a doctor because I think that he would probably be him or her would probably be okay with it. Now, moving on from that, let's move on over to the form. Now, this is HUDs that you're looking at, and we're going to move to the bottom just to get to the point. Now, it's yes or no questions, okay? So when you go in, the first thing you would want to do is talk to your doctor about the situation. Don't bring up it's a disability form just yet. Just say, look, I'm having a situation with whatever problem you physically have. Okay, so it's either going to be physical, mental, just a situation where you're disabled, or if you have cancer and you're dying, or pretty much the four situations. So the first one is disability, and all it needs to prove is that for 12 months or more that you're going to have this problem, okay, and that it's preventing you from working enough to making a good enough living to get normal rate housing, normal market rate housing. So let's give some examples of for number one. Now, number one is talking about disabilities like cancer that are ultimately just going to lead to you dying. So we should probably skip that, as most of you are not going to apply for that. Now, here's another one: the physical, mental, and/or emotional impairment. It's three different requirements, and it's a yes or no question. Okay, is it expected to be long continued or indefinite duration? Look, it just means, is it going to be over 12 months? That's all that means. Does it substantially impede his or her ability to live independently? That's very subjective. Or C, is such a nature that the ability to live independently could be improved by more suitable housing conditions. So when you're having that conversation with a licensed professional or doctor, you know, let's talk about physical. If you've got a back problem, bulging disc, or you have degenerating disc, or you're walking with a cane because you have back problems, that is considered a disability to HUD. And you can tell your doc, you're having that conversation with your doctor saying essentially, look, how many problems I have with my back. I can't work a normal job. I don't make enough money to afford market rate housing. And so I'm asking for your help. And then you tell him, look, this is not the form I'm going to ask you to just sign is going to be not for a disability check. There's no going to court or anything. You're simply signing saying that, yes, I suffer from the problem more than 12 months a year, and that I need help. I need help with getting housing. That's all that this really balances out to be. Um, Now I'm going to show you the actual proof of the different things. And as far as the mental, I'll show you the actual mental acceptance as far as what would be accepted by them mentally and emotionally. Okay, the third one is going to be developmental disability. I don't think most of you are going to have that problem, and actually they do have more stringent requirements for that one than they do number two. So number three and number one are fairly difficult. Um, and then as you can see, name, organization, signature, and date, and then that's it. Okay, for HUD, there's not even it doesn't even look to have a phone number on here. Now the COC, which is the more likely that you're going to be using, okay, is this one. It's a little bit more concise. So one, do you have a serious mental illness? Do you have developmental disabilities? A substance use disorder now qualifies on there. Post-traumatic stress disorder, cognitive impairments, and chronic illness. So let's skip over and actually discuss what all these things mean in the actual HUD. Who is a person with a disability? Physical and mental impairments, so we've already discussed that part, but a physical or mental impairments included, but is not limited to orthopedic, meaning back problems, visual, speech, hearing impairments, a lot of the different diseases like cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, and you can see as the list goes on, heart disease, diabetes automatically qualifies, HIV automatically qualifies, drug addiction and alcoholism. Let me be very clear about drug addiction. It's one thing to be an alcoholic, and it's another thing to have a drug addiction. But if you're abusing prescription drugs, that's fine for this program. But if you're talking about shooting heroin or smoking crack and things like that, you're going to mess yourself up. So when it comes to drug addiction, you better stick to addictions that are not illegal. That is the key word there, not illegal. Because a lot of landlords don't want to deal with you. They'll deal with you popping pills, but they're not going to deal with you shooting heroin. Okay, so do not burn your bridge before this even starts. Let's go on down. Some impairments are readily observable, obviously, like deafness, hard of hearing, being in a wheelchair, obviously. And then if you go down, you'll also see that, we have walking, speaking, hearing, seeing, breathing, working, learning, performing other tasks. And I mean, there's a really long list. So any of these things that affect you is really considered a disability. And you're just having a conversation with your doctor saying, look, this is the problem I have. This is why I don't make so much money, and I'm only having you sign this form in order to help me get housing. It isn't going to require you to get on the phone. It isn't required to go to court. This has nothing to do with a disability check. And then generally, you pretty much have had a pretty reasonable conversation with your medical professional, and then they can sign it and not be bothered again about it. Okay, so you really need to kind of talk to him about that, and you should be okay. Now. I want to go down to the bottom here for the mental part of this and read it to you. So that on the mental side, major depressive disorder, bipolar, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive, and schizophrenia. Now, and it goes on to say this does not mean that other conditions are not disability. But here's the nice part about what the five I just told you. It simply means that in virtually all cases that these conditions are considered disabilities. So the ones I just read off are by their very nature considered a disability. So if you, like I said, if you are bipolar, you are depressed, you have post-traumatic stress, obsessive compulsive, or you are schizophrenic, that is an automatic, okay? And print this form out, bring it with you to your doctor. If that's what you need on a mental deal. Now, look, you don't need to see a psychiatrist who writes pills, okay? Because that's what psychiatrists do. Any professional in the mental health professional field, psychotherapist, psychiatrist, so on and so forth, a counselor, professional counselor, anybody that's licensed through the state, whatever state you're living in, can sign the form for you, okay? And it's the same conversation that your mental problems are preventing you from working the number of hours that you need to work in order to successfully secure decent housing, and that you could benefit by having them sign this and then giving you an opportunity to get housing. You improve your housing situation. So, you know, people try to turn, having a disability into something very sophisticated. And I can see that happening with a disability check, but for HUD, the requirement is extremely low. Proving chronic homelessness is the same situation. It's just a matter of having a homeless letter and, getting yourself logged in that system, and then having at least one person saying, yeah, I've seen this guy. He's been out on the streets now, and not being on a lease obviously could, if you've got a long history of leases, that could be a little bit of a problem. Okay, and so you already know the requirement. So all these two things together. So I'm gonna explain this. Disability and being chronically homeless will shoot you all the way to the top. Okay, so you're in that 1%. Now they will manually start sorting you in that 1% on the list by picking out first the people that have the most needs. So if you are in a wheelchair and handicap, then you're going to go straight to the top of that 1%. And then those that are blind, go there. People that have multiple mental or physical problems are going to be, third in line. And then those of you that have more general things will be below that. But on a list of 70,000 people, and you being in that top 1%, so we would say 1,000 people, your waiting list is, a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, depending on how quickly, if you really are homeless and you don't have all your documentation. And let's keep all this in mind that when you're using a COC, they don't require you to have any physical shred of evidence of an ID or anything. They're supposed to help you. They're required by law to help you get those things, and that means driving you there if that's what's necessary in order to get your documentation. Okay, so the game of being homeless has changed a great deal in the past 20 years. So I think if you look at all these documentations and the links that I've given, I think you should read through all of that very carefully, figure out what is wrong with you mentally, physically, and